Hey everyone, welcome back to another theory video today regarding the future expansion of Endwalker. As of right now, we're still almost midway through September, so we have about, I'd say, probably about 9 weeks left to go before the early release date. So I'm going to try and see if I can get at least one theory video out each week until then, just something to do, I suppose. But today we're going to be speaking about a major theme of any fantasy game, and that is dragons. You can't go wrong with dragons. They're almost a necessity at this point for any kind of fantasy themed game. And if you remember, we learned quite a bit about the dragons from way back in Heavensward. And though we really haven't seen too much of them since then, we do learn more and more about them from time to time. And dragons are going to be playing a major part in the new expansion, or at least one in particular. So I think this is a good time to really come to a theory that I sort of dreamed up, and it's not really based off of anything but kind of what my twisted imagination came up with, so take from it what you will. But the theory is that the dragons are going to be the key to getting us to the moon. Alright, before we go straight off into the theory, I think we really need to focus on a little bit more of the lore of the dragons in this game, or at least 7 in particular of the First Brood. So the First Brood are the title for the 7 great worms that were sired by Midgardsormr, the father of dragons himself. Sometime in the distant past, after the Great Sundering I suspect, Midgardsormr came to this star from a distant world, known to us as the Dragon Star. And he came here bearing 7 eggs upon his back. So, yes, let me just get this out of the way. Midgardsormr is an alien, okay? Yep, we good? We're okay with that? Great. Moving on. All joking aside, the reason that Midgardsormr left the Dragon Star was because he was being pursued by Omega. Yes, so Omega actually did come from the same world that Midgardsormr did. So it sort of started off with Midgardsormr having some kind of war with some other life forms on this distant world. Eventually, he seemed to feel that this world was no longer safe for either him or his brood. So he felt that his only option was to take what was left of his kind, in this case the 7 eggs, his 7 children, and to just flee the Dragon Star and go someplace else, hopefully to find some place that he will be able to raise his children in peace. Omega, though, being the tenacious little devil that he was, pursued Midgardsormr for a very, very long time, I'm assuming. Midgardsormr was actually able to travel long across the cosmos. In fact, he traveled so long and so far that by the time that he was able to find sanctuary, his fiery mane had all been but extinguished. Eventually, though, at some point, he was able to lose Omega long enough to be able to find a suitable place to settle upon. In this case, it was the Star of Hydaelyn. When he arrived, he seemed to have made some sort of a pact with her, though we don't know for sure what it was that they kind of promised. It is suspected that Midgardsormr agreed to protect this world if given sanctuary for him and his children. But long story short, Midgardsormr finally found a safe place where he could be able to rest and finally be able to raise the 7 eggs that he was still protecting with him. Eventually, the 7 eggs he carried hatched, and he was able to pretty much raise them in peace, teach them how to be dragons, everything that they needed to know to survive. And apparently the dragon race was revived with these 7 eggs. So when the time came that they were full grown and ready to leave the nest, so to speak, they spread across the lands of Hydaelyn. Having done his duty to his children, Midgardsormr seems to have taken up residence in Lake Silvertear, where he would remain until the Garleans would invade, but that's another story. Now, we know the fates of 5 of the dragons so far, and we've even met 3 of them in person. We learned that Tiamat and Bahamut went south to the lands that would later become known as the lands of Myricidia, and there they sired many children together, while the other 3, Nidhogg, Racevalgar, and Ratatoskr, went up to the northern regions of Dravania. As for the remaining 2, we know very little of. So, starting off in order here, Bahamut was known as the Dawn Worm, and he was the eldest of the First Brood. He's also the father of the Myricidian Horde, but sadly he was slain in the battle against the Allagan Empire roughly around 3,000 years ago, before eventually being summoned as a newborn primal by his children. Rather than slay him there, the Allagan sealed him up in Dalamun and cast it into orbit for several thousand years until the 7th Umbral Calamity, where Dalamun broke open before crashing into the world and was released. Thanks to Louis Soir, he was stopped but not destroyed. I don't want to reveal too much information about that just in case you don't know the whole story, but only by completing the coils of Bahamut do we really learn the full fate of what happened that day, so spoilers there. Moving on to Tiamat, she was Bahamut's mate and also known as the Duskworm, as well as the mother of the Mericidian horde. After her beloved was slain by the Allagan, she was tricked by the Ascians to summoning him in the primal form. After realizing what she had done and even being mildly tempered in the process, she lamented her actions and allowed herself to be captured and imprisoned by the Allagans as her punishment for resorting to summoning him in such a form. However, if you've played all the way up through patch 5.5, then you know that later on she learned the fate of what her children were going through because of the Ascian Fandaniel. So she decided that this was the time for atonement and fought alongside us after she was freed. She has since returned to Mericidia with what was left of her brood after she helped to destroy the lunar Bahamut. So that is the fate of the first 2 dragons. Now we're moving on to the next 3. So these 3 we learned a great deal of during Heavensward. So we have Race-Valgar, Ratatoskr, and Nidhogg. We'll start with Race-Valgar, who helped to found the Dravanian horde alongside Nidhogg and Ratatoskr. When Ishgard was founded, there were tensions between the 2 sides until Race-Valgar fell in love with an Elysian woman named Shiva. Their love and sacrifice brought an end to the fighting for a time, and for the next 200 years it was a time of peace and prosperity. At least until the slaughtering of his sister Ratatoskr when she was betrayed by King Thordan and his knights. He had lost all faith in mankind after his sister's death, and even though he chose not to take revenge on the people for the murder of his sister, he wished no further part of this war, and even given one of his eyes, the wellspring of their power, to his brother to continue his vengeful attack upon the city for about 1,000 years. At the end of the war, though, thanks to the Warrior of Light, he seems to have been able to find and rekindle at least a little bit of faith in mankind, and even help put an end to the violence. As for Ratatoskr, we never met her in person. We really don't know too much more about her except her tragic end. Ratatoskr founded the Dravanian horde alongside her brothers and acted as an emissary between the Elysian of Ishgard and the dragons during the time of peace. Not much else is known about her since she had been killed 1,000 years prior to the story, but it was said that she had the most beautiful song of any dragon, and she had been taken with the idea of mortals and doted upon them. However, because they sought power, she was betrayed and slaughtered by King Thordan I and his 12 knights. After they killed her, they tore out her eyes to devour them and gain their natural strength, which brought Nidhogg's rage down upon them. So Nidhogg, kind of like I said before, he helped find the Dravanian horde alongside Race-Valgar and Ratatoskr. He was raised as his father's successor and as a protector to the star as one of the strongest of the first brood. However, he believed that mortals were low creatures of very little worth. He didn't really see any value in them, perhaps over what became of his brother Bahamut. But this disdain evolved into pure hatred after discovering that his sister, Ratatoskr, had been slain. This rage was so strong that he held an unending war against Ishgard for 1,000 years after learning of her demise. In fact, so strong was his hatred that not even death could stop him for long, and he returned as a vengeful ghost by possessing the body of the Azure Dragoon until he was permanently slain at the end of the war. Which leads us to the last 2 dragons of the first brood, whom we really don't know too much about other than their names. The first one is Vitra. Now Vitra is the youngest of the first brood, and he will be playing a role as an ally to the Scions in Endwalker. Vitra appeared in the trailer for Endwalker first of all, alongside Estinian, and helping to battle off against these swarms of monsters. And he was later seen again flying right alongside the Warrior of Light in the benchmark, showing that these dragons are going to continue to play a huge role in the upcoming days, though we know precious little else of them. That leaves us with Azdaja, whom any other details other than her name are completely unknown to us. However, it stands to reason that if all the others broke up into smaller groups and scattered across the lands of Hydaelyn, it's reasonable to guess that maybe Azdaja and Vitra both did as well. I mean, I can easily see them both maybe being the youngest members of the First Brood, and I mean, especially after Vitra was confirmed to actually be the youngest. So what role will the dragons play in the new expansion? Well, we need to remember that the final days are going to be coming to the world, which is going to be bad for everyone, even the dragons, so I can totally see the dragons joining forces with us during this time, or at the very least as a temporary truce. However, with everything we know of the dragons, I can't say that it's going to be easy to convince Vitra to help us out. Putting Azdaja aside for a moment, I can kind of predict that we're going to have to maybe try to earn Vitra's support to be able to convince him to lend us a helping hand. We did see him flying alongside the Warrior of Light in the benchmark as well as the trailer, so it kind of looks like Vitra made his home here in Thannar. Now, the couple times that we have seen him both in the benchmark and in the trailer, we see him upon the lands of Thannar. Which makes sense because it's supposed to be based off Middle East in the real world, and there's no shortages of dragons in their mythology and culture. It really wouldn't surprise me if the people of Thannar kind of maybe worship Vitra and possibly Azdaja as gods. In that sense, maybe it could be that the two of them serve as protectors to these lands and its people, which may be part of why Garlemald never invaded if there was another horde of dragons scattered about there. Haven't seen anything about another horde about these parts, of course, but it would explain at least partly why the Garleans were so interested in a way with dealing with dragons if they were planning on reaching out to Thannar eventually. Perhaps since the people of Thannar may worship dragons as gods, Vitra may feel that it's his duty to protect them, or at the least protect the lands that he calls home for his horde. I'm not sure where Azdaja is right now since there's literally no mention of her, and it worries me that something bad may have happened with her. I do think that a portion of the adventure in Endwalker is going to be us winning over Vitra's trust and having him lend us his aid. I personally don't think it's going to be as difficult as it was with Hraesvelgr. Maybe if he learns that if we helped out both Hraesvelgr and Tiamat, he may be willing to lend us his help. That's hard to say for sure. But why would this be important to the story and getting to the moon? Well, we know that there will be going to the moon at some point in the story, but the question is, how do we get there? Well, this theory is one of two ways. After all, since Midgardsormr was able to come to this world by literally traveling across the stars, and we've actually seen Hraesvelgr do something similar during the Omega storyline, it may not be impossible for a dragon to be able to fly off towards the moon. But the thing that gets me thinking about this is this image. This clearly looks like the Crash version of Ragnarok. If you played through Final Fantasy VIII, then you know that the characters there did end up traveling through space at one point, spoilers there, and they were eventually able to come back home thanks to the starship, the Ragnarok. And this ship literally looks a great deal like the same ship. The question now is, how could they have gotten their hands on this? Because, okay, let's say for example that they are able to discover that they need to get to the moon in order to be able to save the world for whatever reason. Because as advanced as Garlemald is, to me it doesn't seem they're that advanced yet to be able to actually travel through space. But if only there was another civilization out there that we could possibly get a starship from. Someplace that has experience actually launching something right into space. Wait a minute. So yes, if Vitra himself isn't able to fly us to the moon in person, then I'm thinking that Ragnarok is really the only way that we can actually get to the moon reasonably. I mean, it stands to reason that if there was any civilization out there that could have built it, it would be Alec. And if it became lost or hidden somewhere, then only someone who was around during that time could possibly have any idea where it would be. I can't help but be reminded of the image that we'd seen before of the floating islands, then this is supposed to be playing a major role in the game at some point. Now, floating islands aren't exactly rare here, but who do we know who loves to make their homes in such floating islands? That's right, the dragons, especially the First Brood. Maybe it's here on this mysterious floating island that they showed us before that Ragnarok is somewhere hidden, that this was actually an island that was built up by Alec. Because we know that Alec has done this before, they have built floating islands with the use of technology. So it could be that maybe they were able to build like this particular floating island and they have Ragnarok either stored here or maybe even more information about how to find Ragnarok. Maybe this land was left over from Alug and Vitra decided to make it his home. You know, just out of spite, because I honestly don't think he would have been a big fan of Alug, especially after they're the ones who slew his brother Bahamut. When we find out that we have to go to the moon, and we come to these lands, that's where we meet Vitra, we win his trust, and he's able to tell us where we might be able to find Ragnarok, or even open up the way to get to Ragnarok, and we're able to fly off towards the moon and perhaps even crash on the moon's surface. Or option number 2, Vitra is actually able to fly us straight to the moon himself. We happen to find the ship in space somehow, maybe it was left over from the Allagons after they launched Dalamud into the sky or some such, and we're able to use that ship to escape, much like what happened in Final Fantasy VIII. Anyway, those are just my theories. I do think that there is going to be some kind of connection that the dragons are going to be kind of piecing together for us in order to help us reach the moon and confront who could be the final boss, whoever that may be. Anyway, we do still have a couple months to go before we are able to actually play the game and find out, but it's fun to think about till then. Anyway, everyone, thank you all so much for watching. What did you all think? You think that the dragons will be playing such a role in the game? How do you think we'll be getting to the moon? And what role do you think Vitra will be playing otherwise if he doesn't help us get to the moon? What about Azdaja? What do you think happened with her? Anyway, let me know down in the comments what you think, and if you have any ideas for theories or suggestions to what's going to happen, please let me know. I am going to try my best to try to get a video out each week for theories and predictions. As for my next theory video, I think I might be going into a little bit more details about what I think Anima is going to be playing in it. Anyway, that's for next time, so let me know what you all think. Once again, my name's Fantasy Girl, and thank you so much for tuning in. Bye!